The little girl's hand was pressed against the glass of the sinking school bus, and every second, the muddy water climbed higher around her terrified face. People stood frozen along the riverbank, shouting for someone to help, but no one moved toward the broken guardrail. Then a man in a faded janitor's uniform dropped his mop bucket, climbed over the barrier, and ran straight into the rushing water. He had no rescue gear, no training anyone knew about, and no idea that the child he was about to save belonged to one of the richest women in the country. If you believe kindness can change a life, that forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds, and that hope deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you can remain part of our family and our community. His name was Everett Callahan, a 39-year-old single father who had learned to measure life in small victories. A full refrigerator was a victory. Paying the electric bill before the deadline was a victory. Getting his 12-year-old son, Milo, to school with clean clothes and a packed lunch was a victory. Everett worked as a janitor at a private elementary school on the edge of Bellwether County, cleaning classrooms after wealthy children went home, polishing floors he could never afford to put in his own apartment, and quietly repairing whatever he could because asking for help had become something he was no longer comfortable doing. Years earlier, he had worked a respectable job and believed his future was secure, but after his wife died suddenly from an illness, everything collapsed. He had taken whatever work allowed him to raise Milo himself. He never complained about being poor. What hurt him most was knowing that his son sometimes noticed the difference between their life and the lives of the children whose parents arrived in luxury vehicles. That morning, Everett had been wiping rainwater from the school entrance when he heard the distant screech of tires. The school day had barely begun, and gray clouds still hung over the hills, but the streets were bright enough to reveal every terrible detail. A school bus had skidded on a flooded road near the river bridge. The front wheels had broken through a damaged barrier, and the vehicle had plunged sideways into the swollen water below. Within moments, the river had swallowed half the bus. Children were crying inside. Teachers and drivers were screaming for emergency crews. Everett ran toward the bridge without thinking. His son Milo had been among the students scheduled for the bus route that morning, but by an extraordinary coincidence, Milo had been absent because he had a fever. Everett did not know whether to feel grateful or terrified. He only knew that a child was trapped. He reached the riverbank just as the bus tilted dangerously. The current pushed against the vehicle, and the windows began disappearing beneath the muddy surface. Everett saw a small face behind one of them. The girl was wearing a yellow raincoat, and her palm was pressed against the glass. Everett struck the window with a heavy metal tool someone had dropped nearby, but the first blow did nothing. The second cracked the glass. The third shattered it. Water rushed into the bus, and Everett plunged his arm through the broken window. The little girl grabbed him with both hands. He pulled with everything he had, cutting his forearm against the jagged glass as the current tried to drag them both away. For one terrifying moment, he lost his footing, but he wrapped his free arm around a seat frame and refused to let go. When Everett finally pulled the child through the broken window, he held her against his chest and fought his way back toward the riverbank. The crowd reached down and pulled them both to safety. The girl was shaking violently, coughing and crying, but she was alive. Everett sat on the wet ground, breathing heavily, blood running from his arm. Someone placed a blanket around the child. Another person called emergency services. Everett barely heard any of it. He was staring at the girl as if she were his own Milo, whispering that she was safe now and that she had been very brave. The girl's name was Maisie Whitmore. She was 8 years old, and before the accident, almost no one in the community knew much about her family beyond the fact that her mother was extraordinarily wealthy. Her mother, Celeste Whitmore, was the founder and chief executive of Whitmore Holdings, a technology and investment empire worth billions. Celeste had built her company from nothing after years of relentless work, but wealth had come at a terrible cost. Her husband had left when Maisie was still a toddler, and Celeste had spent years convincing herself that providing everything money could buy was the same as being present. Maisie had private tutors, elite schools, beautiful clothes, and a home larger than most hotels, but what she wanted most was simply her mother's attention. When Celeste received the call that Maisie had been in a bus accident, the Billionaire CEO abandoned a meeting and rushed to the hospital. She arrived during the daytime, still wearing the tailored suit she had worn to work, but there was nothing powerful about the woman who ran into the emergency department. She was a mother terrified that the one person she could never replace had been taken from her. Then she saw Maisie sitting safely in a hospital bed, wrapped in a blanket. Celeste almost collapsed with relief. But before she could reach her daughter, Maisie pointed toward the hallway. Everett was sitting there alone, his injured arm bandaged, his clothes still wet and stained with mud. He had refused treatment beyond what was necessary because he was worried about missing work. Celeste walked toward him, expecting to see an ordinary school employee. Instead, she saw a man who looked exhausted, humble, and completely uninterested in recognition. Celeste thanked him, but Everett simply told her that anyone would have done the same. She looked into his tired eyes and realized he did not believe that about himself. He genuinely believed saving Maisie was simply what a decent person was supposed to do. The next morning, Celeste discovered something that disturbed her even more. She learned that Everett was a single father struggling to support his son. She also learned that he had previously worked in emergency response before leaving that career after his wife's death. There was something else in his records that caught her attention. Everett had once received commendations for life-saving work during a major flood years earlier. He had never mentioned any of it. Celeste began asking questions, and what she discovered changed the way she saw him. Everett had once been respected as a rescue specialist. But after his wife died, he had fallen into depression, lost his position, and eventually chose a quieter life so he could be there for Milo. He had sacrificed status, income, and recognition because his son needed a father more than the world needed another hero. Meanwhile, Maisie became deeply attached to Everett. She remembered the sound of his voice telling her not to give up while the bus filled with water. She wanted to see him again. Celeste agreed, and when Everett arrived with Milo, something unexpected happened. Maisie smiled for the first time since the accident. Milo, who had initially been embarrassed by his father's janitor uniform, watched his father carefully as Maisie hugged him. That moment quietly broke something inside Celeste. She had spent years believing children needed expensive schools, perfect homes, and endless opportunities. Yet her own daughter had been happiest simply sitting beside a tired man who had nothing except kindness to give. Celeste offered Everett a high-paying position at one of her companies. Everett refused. He explained that he did not want charity and did not want his son growing up believing their future depended on someone wealthy feeling sorry for them. Celeste was offended at first, but later she realized he was right. She had spent much of her life using money to solve problems that money had actually made harder. Then the real conflict began. A media outlet published a story about the bus rescue, and Everett suddenly became famous. Reporters surrounded the school. People praised him as a hero. But another story soon appeared accusing him of negligence because he had been working near the school entrance instead of supervising the children. The accusation was completely false, but the school board panicked. Everett was suspended while they investigated. Celeste was furious. She could have ended the situation with one phone call, but Everett asked her not to. He wanted the truth to stand on its own. For the first time in years, Celeste chose not to use her power. She investigated quietly. Security footage showed Everett had been cleaning the entrance when he heard the crash. Witness statements confirmed that he had been the first person to enter the river. Emergency responders confirmed that his actions had saved Maisie's life. But Celeste found something else. The school had known for months that the bridge barrier was damaged. Several maintenance reports had been ignored because repairs were considered too expensive. The bus company had also warned that the road was unsafe during heavy rain. Celeste could have simply bought the school and replaced everything. Instead, she publicly demanded accountability and used her influence to force the county to investigate the neglected infrastructure. Everett was reinstated, but he still did not want applause. He returned to work wearing the same faded uniform. One afternoon, Celeste found him in the school courtyard repairing a broken bench while Milo sat nearby doing homework. She watched the two of them for a long moment before admitting that she had been wrong about many things. She had believed success meant building something enormous that everyone could see. Everett had shown her that sometimes the greatest thing a person could build was a safe place for one child to come home to. Celeste began changing her life in small ways. She rearranged her schedule so she could have lunch with Maisie. She attended school events instead of sending assistants. She learned what books her daughter loved. She listened when Maisie talked. She stopped answering business calls during family meals. She discovered that her daughter did not need a billionaire mother. She needed her mother. Everett changed too. For years, he had hidden behind humility because he was afraid of losing what little he had left. He finally allowed himself to dream again. He enrolled in a community emergency management program and began training for rescue work. Milo watched his father become confident again, not because he had become rich, but because he had remembered who he was. Months later, Celeste established a foundation dedicated to supporting single parents, emergency responders, and children affected by disasters. But she insisted that Everett help design its programs. He understood the people the foundation was meant to serve because he had lived their struggles. On the day the foundation opened its first community center, Maisie stood beside Everett and Milo. The building was not extravagant. It had classrooms, a small library, a kitchen, counseling rooms, and a training area for emergency preparedness. Celeste looked around and realized that the most important thing she had ever built had not been a corporation. It was a place where people could come when life had left them with nothing. Before the ceremony ended, Maisie quietly took Everett's hand. She told him that she used to think heroes were people with special powers, expensive cars, or famous names. Now she knew a hero could also be a tired father in a janitor's uniform who simply refused to leave a frightened child behind. Everett looked at Celeste, and she smiled through tears. Neither of them needed to pretend that their lives had become perfect. Everett still had bills. Celeste still had difficult decisions. Milo still had insecurities. Maisie still sometimes feared deep water. But they had learned something more valuable than wealth could ever provide. People do not become family only through blood. Sometimes family begins with a stranger choosing to care. And the man Celeste had first seen as a poor janitor became the person who reminded a billionaire that the richest life is not the one with the most money, but the one with the most people you are willing to save, forgive, love, and stand beside. Before you go, leave a meaningful comment telling us what you believe was the most powerful lesson in Everett's story. Was it courage, sacrifice, forgiveness, or simply choosing to help someone when nobody else would? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes, the person the world overlooks is the very person capable of changing someone's entire life.